Hello, I'm Maria and welcome back to my Nook. Today I want to talk about all the books that I have read in July and in August. Since I have done a lot of reading vlogs lately on a lot of these books, I'll try to keep it brief and I'm going to jump right into it. So the first book I finished in July was A Treacherous Curse by Deanna Raybourn. This is the third book in the Veronica Speedwell series, which is a historical mystery series with some romance. There's currently 8 books out and it's a very, very slow burn romance, as I've heard. In this book, the two main characters, Veronica and Stoker, try to solve a case in which there's an expedition in Egypt, or there was an expedition in Egypt, and then like people started dying and disappearing and stuff like that. And some people thought there was a curse on the expedition. Veronica and Stoker obviously tried to find out the truth about things. This book I definitely enjoyed quite a lot. One, because of everything that was about the Egyptian culture and everything. I really did enjoy that. And two, because there was some development in this book where, first of all, Stoker was sort of tied to the case, which was very intriguing and kind of juicy. And also, there were a lot of scenes that made for Stoker to like face his past and possibly get some closure for his past. There were some pretty powerful scenes in this book, in my opinion, and also some development in the romance. I've heard that the fourth book has amazing development in the romance, and the third book already set that up so good. I really did enjoy this book a lot. It had some twists and turns that I really enjoyed, and as the Veronica Speedwell series does, it's a little ridiculous at times, and like some things in this book happened where I thought, I cannot believe this is happening right now. And obviously the banter between Veronica and Stoker, A+, as always. Please do check the trigger warnings too though. I would recommend you do that, because I went into this book without doing that. I kind of just trusted Deanna Raybourn, and I was quite taken aback at some moment. All in all, I'm giving A Treacherous Curse 4.5 stars. After that, I read and finished The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie. Unfortunately, I don't have a physical copy to hold up for you because I borrowed this one from the library. It was the July book club pick of the Wyverns and Words book club that is run by Cassandra Lynn and Katie is reading. And I did enjoy this book. It's a fantasy book in which there is this main character, Mina, who lives in a world where there's a lot of war and hunger and disease going on, and her people believe that they have upset the sea god, like this huge god that they believe in. They've upset him somehow, and because of that, they want to try to soothe him by giving him a bride each year. They basically give her to the sea and hope that she will be the one true sea god's bride, and he will be soothed and like stop their wars, stop their hunger, stuff like that. And at one point at the very beginning of the novel, the girlfriend of Mina's brother was chosen to be the next sea bride, but her brother goes with his girlfriend to like accompany her, which is against the rules. And then Mina wants to save her brother and his girlfriend and so she jumps into the sea instead, and then she like tries to save the sea gods, save her people and all that. Like, honestly, I did enjoy this book. It was pretty easy to read, but on the other hand, sometimes it felt a little too easy, because sometimes things were just moving so fast that some of the emotional impact was missing that we were supposed to have as readers. There was just not enough time given to feel those emotions at some points. A lot of things and a lot of plot points were very predictable in my opinion. Like, compared to other books I've read, I really predicted so many things in this book. Plus, I kind of felt like the author had a brainstorming session in which a lot of ideas came together, but instead of discarding some entirely or maybe taking some of the ideas and putting them into another book, the author just put all of the ideas into the same book and tried to squeeze all of them into the same plot. And that kind of made it feel very full, and there was a lot of stuff happening, especially considering that this is a standalone fantasy novel that was not incredibly long. I mean, the last 25% of this book kind of felt like a fever dream, because I thought, does this plot ever end? It was just another thing happened and another thing and yet another thing happened, and I really just thought, when is this book ending? So maybe this plot would have been better off as a longer book, or maybe a duology even. The vibes were so amazing though. So if you're in for vibes, I would absolutely recommend this book for the vibes. They were A+. I enjoyed those so much, but maybe I wouldn't exactly recommend it for the plot. So I think I'm giving this book 3.75 stars. The next book I read was called Nettle and Bone by Kingfisher. I read this for the Patreon buddy read of Cassandra Lynn's Patreon, and this book is a pretty short standalone fantasy novel with some horror aspects, which, by the way, I did not know about the horror aspects when I started reading this book, because normally I stay so far away from anything horror. Also, again, I don't have a physical copy to hold up because I borrowed this book from the library as well. I read this as an ebook and listened to the audiobook, which I really enjoyed. It had been over 2 months since I last listened to an audiobook, and I missed it so much. So I definitely really enjoyed that. Overall, I did really enjoy this book actually. It had a lot of spooky fairy tale vibes. I also really recommend you check the trigger warnings before going into this book, because there's a lot of dark and heavy themes, especially when it comes to abuse, for example. So don't take those trigger warnings lightly, please. In this book, we have our main character Mara, whose 2 older sisters have and are suffering at the hands of an abusive prince, and now Mara is trying to save her sister, and she's doing that by going to this dust wife who can do magic and she wants to be given the tools to kill this prince, and then she embarks on this journey to do that. And again, it's just got this like spooky fairy tale type of vibe, and I definitely really enjoyed this. The magic and the world was so creative in my opinion. There were so many things in this book that I felt like I've never heard or read about before or seen in any movie, and I really loved that. They were so creative and cool. I enjoyed that so much. It was a really intriguing world. There was some depth missing, for example when it came to the world building, and like some depth when it came to the characters and the plot, obviously. But to be fair, this book is a standalone fantasy novel and it was only like 250 pages long, I believe. So it's not a 600-page high fantasy book, and I don't think I should judge it like a 600-page high fantasy book, because it's not one. I felt like the author's note at the end of the book was also pretty insightful, because she wrote that this idea for this book came to her when she was actually working on a fairy tale for children and failing at that. But like, it kind of makes sense that this book has fairy tale vibes when I read that in the author's note. And then there's also the thing that she said that this book had a deadline of like 2 months. I wasn't sure whether the author meant that at some point in the writing process she only had 2 months left before the deadline, or if she only had 2 months to write this book from the beginning. But like, that might explain why this book is on the shorter side and why there might be some depth missing. But yeah, all in all, I enjoyed this book and it kind of surprised me, and I think I'm giving it 4 stars, honestly. The last book I finished in July was The Sorcerer in the North by John Flanagan. This is the 5th book in the Ranger's Apprentice series, and it's also the first book in which Will, the main character of the series, is a fully fledged ranger. So in this story, he therefore gets assigned his own fief, but then he has to go on this undercover mission, and I don't think I can say what this undercover mission is about, because that might be a little spoilery. But this book is part of a 2-book story arc, and the 6th book is basically the second part to that. So this book ended on a cliffhanger. I did really enjoy this book. I felt a little weird about the fact that Will is a fully fledged ranger now, but honestly that's probably just because for 5 books I've seen him as an apprentice, and now he's suddenly so grown up and takes care of his own fief and is all on his own, and it's probably a type of like mother-son situation. Even though he's obviously not my son. Like, this is a bit dramatic, I know, but you get my point, probably. I also really loved the aspect of him going on this undercover mission. I really enjoyed the whole scenery that was going on in the area where he was doing this undercover mission. There was some great imagery. It was a little creepy, a little eerie, which I really enjoyed. And honestly, that's also kind of what set this book apart from the others so far. Also, the fact that the antagonist in this book was neither pre-established nor from another country, which was the case for all the other antagonists so far in the other books. So that was definitely something different. And again, I just enjoyed the scenery, I enjoyed the undercover mission, I enjoyed the action in this book, I enjoyed seeing Will being grown up, and there was a dog in this book, which I loved a lot. I do think that some of the plot twists were rather predictable, but honestly this is a like kids and teenagers book, so I'm not expecting the most intricate high fantasy type of plot twists. I do think that the first half was kind of a big setup, but I should probably not judge the pace of this book alone, but rather judge the pace of the 5th and 6th book together, because they're one story arc. So I don't know if I can really judge the pace of this book. But like, that might have been one thing that I didn't totally enjoy, but it was still fine. Still, it didn't quite feel like a 5-star read, but I really enjoyed it, so I'm giving it 4 stars. And since these were all the books that I have read in July, I'm going to hand you guys over to August Maria now, so she can talk about all the books that I have read in August with you. Hello everybody, I'm August Maria and I'm here to talk about the first two books that I have finished in August. The first one being a Dangerous Collaboration by Deanna Raybourn. Now, I did a whole reading vlog on this book, so I'll try to keep this review brief, and if you want a more detailed one, you can check out that reading vlog. But honestly, in conclusion, I loved this book. It was so good. I enjoyed it so much. I had the best reading experiences with this book. It was so good. It got all the emotions, all the reactions out of me. It was an emotional roller coaster at some points, but in a good way. Like, I enjoyed it. So in this book, Veronica and Stoker are investigating a case on this secluded island because there is a castle on that island, and this castle is owned by an old friend of Stoker's eldest brother, and the owner of this castle had a bride once who disappeared on their wedding day. Nobody ever found out what happened to her, and now he's basically summoned a few of his family members and a few friends, and also Veronica and Stoker, because he wants to figure out what happened to his bride once and for all. So Veronica and Stoker are at this castle on this island investigating this case. And honestly, there are so many things I loved about this. First of all, the location, just the imagery, the scenery, the descriptions of the island and the village on the island were so beautiful. The nature was described so beautifully. I loved it so much. And the castle was such a cool location. It was beautiful, but also a little creepy and eerie at some times, which I enjoyed so much. I don't usually consume anything horror, but I do like tiny spooky aspects in the media I consume from time to time, so I really enjoyed that. And I also really enjoyed the case that they were investigating in this book. I really loved the development in the romance between Veronica and Stoker. It was A+, chef's kiss. It was so good. I had grown to expect a good romance development because that's what I've heard about the book, and I was not disappointed at all. At some point I was kind of scared that I might be disappointed and I might build my expectations a bit too high, but I was not disappointed at all. It was so good. I enjoyed it so much, and I also really enjoyed that we got to see a bit of a more vulnerable side of some of the main characters and also some of the recurring characters in this series, which just gave them even more depth, and I obviously enjoy getting some more depth to the characters in a series that I love. So I just really enjoyed this book. It also looks a little bit worn. Maybe not worn, but rather well loved. Let's call it that, because I really did love this book. I enjoyed it so much, and I'm so excited for the next books in the series, especially the next one, considering what was set up in this book, right? So yeah, all in all, I'm giving this book 5 stars. And then the second book I finished in August was The Siege of Macindaw by John Flanagan. This is the 6th book in the Ranger's Apprentice series and the second part to the story arc that I was talking about when reviewing The Sorcerer in the North, because The Sorcerer in the North is the first part of that story arc. And in this book, Will and his companions are trying to solve the issue that presented itself to them in the 5th book. I think that's probably all I can say without either spoiling the 5th book or the 6th book. So that's what happened. Just like in the 5th book, I really enjoyed the location that this was set in. I really enjoyed the antagonist that we were presented. And I really enjoyed Will and his companions and seeing Will all grown up and taking care of his own mission and all that. I do have to say though that I usually take notes in my notes app, obviously, of like thoughts, feelings, emotions, anything I want to write down while reading a book. And after finishing this book, I realized that I barely wrote anything down, which sometimes means that I was bored with a book or that I didn't care enough about a book to have a lot of thoughts or feelings, or I didn't care enough to write them down. But I also want to say that lately I have been having a bit of a hard time to get myself to read. When I sit down and I am reading, I'm enjoying my time and I'm enjoying the books I'm reading, but making myself sit down and pick up a book and start reading, that's a bit hard sometimes. I don't know what this is, but whatever is happening at the moment is inevitably and sadly influencing my reading experience of the books that I am reading at the moment. I still don't really want to blame any of that on the books that I'm reading, because I do feel like I did enjoy this book. It was just in a way that I was able to turn my brain off, if that makes any sense. With a Dangerous Collaboration, for example, I enjoyed it in the way that, oh my god, I had so many emotions and so many thoughts and everything was a roller coaster. But this book I enjoyed in the way that it was easy to read, it was so easy to just fall into it, and it just flowed so nicely, which was exactly what I've been needing lately. And that just made it possible for me to turn my brain off and really just fall into this book and not have to think about anything. I was just able to kind of go along and enjoy the ride without having to think about, ooh, what's going to happen next? Oh, what does this mean? And what does that mean? You know, which I feel like is a good thing too. Especially for me personally, it is a really good thing when media I'm consuming manages to give me the opportunity to turn my brain off. The ending of this book sure was a roller coaster, and I had a lot of feelings about that. I'm really looking forward to the next books in the series. But to be honest, it hasn't been too long since I finished this book yet, and because of the reading experience that I just described, I haven't really decided on a star rating yet, but I kind of had to film this today. So you're going to see the star rating I decided on the screen right now. The next book I finished in August was a manga, actually the first manga I have ever read in my entire life. So that was surely exciting. The book I'm talking about was Spy Family Volume 1 by Tatsuya Endo. I had borrowed this from my library, so you will have to do with the picture on the screen. So this series, the Spy Family manga series, is basically about a spy, his codename is Twilight, who gets assigned this mission to keep an eye on somebody, and for that he has to gather a fake family. And in the first volume he finds a fake child from an orphanage. Her name is Anya. She's like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old, maybe 6. And she's a telepath. But nobody knows that, including Twilight. And he also finds a fake wife. Her name is Yor. And she is secretly an assassin. But Twilight doesn't know that either. And another twist is that the kid, Anya, because she's a telepath, knows that Twilight is a spy and that Lloyd Forger isn't his real name, and she knows that her fake mother, Yor, is an assassin, and she knows that her fake dad is on some sort of mission and everything, but neither of her 2 fake parents know that she knows. You know, that's the kind of twist of the series. And in the first volume, it's basically just about Twilight finding his fake family and sort of the mission starting out and him kind of trying to figure out how to go about this fake family mission. I honestly really enjoyed this first volume of Spy Family. There was action, there were funny moments and really wholesome moments, and I really enjoyed the characters so far. I also really liked the art style of the manga, so everything was just really fun, and I just really enjoyed my reading experience. I had a lot of good laughs, so that's always a great sign. And as I already said, I enjoyed the characters, so I'm definitely planning on continuing the Spy Family series as soon as I can, because I'll probably borrow them from my library. So I'll have to see when I can borrow them. But I do want to continue the series. At first I thought maybe I'm not going to rate this manga because I'm considering not writing graphic novels, comics, mangas, etc. anymore in the future because they're kind of hard to rate sometimes. But then I thought, why don't I just rate this? Because I had a great time. I'm not too overly critical when it comes to graphic novels, comics, and mangas. So I think I'm just going to give Spy Family Volume 1 5 stars. I might change this rating in the future, who knows? But right now I feel like giving this 5 stars, so why not, right? Last but definitely not least, I have finished Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. This book is contemporary fiction, literary fiction, general fiction, something like that. And that's a genre that I don't typically reach for, so this was definitely a new experience for me. So just to like mention that right up front, that I haven't read enough books in that genre to actually have a lot of things for comparison so I could judge this book properly. I can probably not judge this book properly. That being said, this book is basically about Sadie and Sam. They met each other when they were kids, and they basically met through video games. Now, in this book, we see them from when they were kids to when they're in their 30s, how they go through life, what kinds of things happen to them, the relationships they have with other people, and at some point they start making video games together. And we see their relationship together. As I already said, we see their relationships with other people, etc, etc. I personally am maybe not exactly a gamer, but I'm definitely interested in video games, so I really enjoyed the setting that this book was set in, the video games industry. But I also thought that the talk about video games and the programming and designing of video games was not too extensive if it had been too extensive, maybe I wouldn't have been able to follow. But it was on such a level that there was depth to it. But I, as somebody who does not know much or nothing at all about video game programming and designing and the actual industry behind it, I was still able to follow everything and understand everything rather easily. And I was also able to like pick out a few of the references from video games, etc. So that was definitely fun. This book is told in a non-linear timeline, so we're jumping back and forth between past and present, and there's flashbacks, and then there's like foreshadowing where the author, for example, shows us a scene in the present and then shows us an interview that one of the characters gave about that situation like 10 years into the future for further context, and I really thought that gave the story even more layers and more depth, which I really enjoyed. Flashbacks were pretty neatly tied in because it was literally just part of the way the timeline worked, and sometimes you didn't even really notice when a flashback started. You really got such a good feel for the characters, and they felt so real and the relationships felt so organic. Sometimes the book felt a little more like a documentary than a novel, but in a good way, because the characters felt so real. If that makes any sense, I hope it does. By like page 172 or something, I wrote down in my notes app that I already felt like I had read an entire novel worth of information about Sadie and Sam and the other characters, but the book still didn't feel very info dumpy. And by the way, I know that the synopsis or the concept, premise, whatever you want to call it, of this book might sound a little boring or random because you're really just following these people from when they were kids to when they're in their 30s, but somehow it's not. At first I also thought, I don't know if I'm going to enjoy this, but then I started reading and I just kept reading and kept reading, and at some point I thought, I'm not quite enjoying this the way I'm enjoying my fantasy books or romance books. And at the same time I thought, but I must be enjoying it on some level, because otherwise I would be considering DNFing this book. But I'm not. There is something that keeps me reading, and I just kept reading and reading and reading. I'm still not quite sure what it was, but it was there. I do want to say that there was one part that, even though I had read the trigger warnings for this book, when it came and the way it came was so unexpected and suddenly that that whole part of the book was so incredibly jarring and upsetting to me. Upsetting not in the sense of like I was angry at the author for doing this, not that, but like the kind of upset that you are when something jarring happens, you know? So please, really, I know I say this about almost every book, but please check the trigger warnings for this book. I really just want everybody out there to be safe, so don't take these trigger warnings lightly, because this book does tackle a lot of sensitive and heavy topics. As I already said, I think this book was definitely extraordinary. The writing style was unlike anything I had ever read before. But then again, I've also not really read any like contemporary general fiction before, but like still, the writing style was so unique, at least to me as of right now. I also feel like this book has such a huge potential to stay with a reader for a very long time because there's so much food for thought in this book. However, I don't really agree with some of the advertising for this book, because I've seen this book advertised as like a celebration of friendship, but I don't really think it is, because the main friendship in this book is a rather toxic platonic relationship, and other relationships in this book are not quite very healthy either. Some of them are more healthy than others, but like, I wouldn't call this a celebration of friendship, so maybe don't go into this book thinking that it is. Overall, I did enjoy this book. I can't quite put into words how or why, even though I did try for like 10 minutes just now. But I think it still didn't quite feel like a 5-star read, so I think I'm going to give this book maybe 4 or 4.5 stars, or maybe something in between, but probably rather 4 stars. And just as a little side note again, I have read most of these books in reading vlogs, so you can check those out. I will have linked them down below. And that was the last book I have read in August. So with this, I will let you guys go. And I really hope you have enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. Maybe let me know down in the comments which books you have read in July and or August, and which were your favorites. If you like this video, maybe give it a thumbs up, and perhaps subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any future videos. Otherwise, I will see you guys somewhere else on the internet or in my next video. Bye!